My name is Eleanor, and I am 65 years old. For over 4 decades, as a professional nanny, I devoted myself to the sacred art of nurturing children, understanding their needs before they could even voice them. I raised my son Michael as a single mother, pouring every ounce of wisdom and love into ensuring he received the finest care possible. When I learned I would become a grandmother, my heart soared with anticipation for this cherished new chapter. I spent months meticulously preparing a handmade layette for my grandson Tommy, each tiny stitch woven with dreams of the bond we would share. Then Tommy arrived, and my world shattered in ways I never imagined possible. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, immediately declared that only her mother Brenda could hold him, first claiming she had more experience, despite my 4 decades of professional childcare. I was banned from the hospital, denied that precious first embrace, excluded from his naming ceremony, as if I were a stranger rather than his grandmother. Eleanor is just the other grandmother, Sarah announced publicly, her words cutting through my heart like a blade. When I turned to Michael for support, my own son betrayed me completely. "Mom, you're being selfish. You're losing your mind," he declared, choosing his wife's cruelty over his mother's love. My professional competence, my maternal devotion, my very humanity were viciously attacked and dismissed. I felt utterly discarded, rendered invisible, profoundly disrespected in the most fundamental way. Yet as overwhelming despair threatened to consume me, something deeper began to stir. The same unwavering dedication to child welfare that had driven my entire career ignited a cold, determined fury. What Sarah, Michael, Brenda, their manipulative lawyer, Mr. Davies, and the watching public could never suspect was the extent of my documentation and preparation. Years of meticulous child development records lay waiting, and hidden security cameras throughout my home had captured Sarah and Michael's calculated discussions about excluding me, Sarah's chilling statements about my supposed interference, and Michael's spineless agreement to their cruel conspiracy. My renowned child development specialist ally stood ready to act. This time, their systematic alienation would not merely unravel. It would expose the shocking depths of their inhumanity, restore my rightful place in Tommy's life, and prove that truth will always triumph over manipulation and betrayal. 3 days had passed since Tommy's birth. 3 days since I had been barred from the hospital, like some dangerous criminal, rather than a loving grandmother who had waited 65 years for this moment. The silence from Michael and Sarah was deafening, but my professional experience with difficult family dynamics told me I needed to address this crisis before it hardened into permanent exclusion. I drove to their modest suburban home, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel as I rehearsed the words I hoped might bridge this inexplicable divide. The nursery I had helped prepare during Sarah's pregnancy glowed softly through the window, and I could see the mobile I had carefully selected hanging above Tommy's crib. Everything looked exactly as we had planned together, except for the most important element, me. Michael answered the door with a face full of strain and guilt, unable to meet my eyes directly. Behind him, Sarah sat in the living room holding Tommy with a possessive intensity that made my professional instincts immediately alert to trouble. This wasn't the natural protective behavior of a new mother. This was something calculated and exclusionary. "Mom," Michael said quietly, his voice heavy with discomfort. "Sarah's still recovering. Maybe this isn't the best time for visitors." The word visitors hit me like a physical blow. After 4 decades of caring for infants, after raising Michael from birth as a single mother, after spending months preparing for this grandchild with joy and anticipation. I was being treated like an unwelcome stranger at the door of my own family. "Michael," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "I'm not a visitor. I'm Tommy's grandmother. I've been waiting to meet him properly, to hold him and welcome him to our family." Sarah's voice cut through the air with chilling composure. "Eleanor, I need you to understand something clearly. My mother gets to hold Tommy first. She has real experience with newborns. You're just the other grandmother, and frankly, I'm not comfortable with how pushy you've been about this whole situation." The casual cruelty of her words took my breath away. 40 years of professional childcare experience was being dismissed as irrelevant, while my maternal love was characterized as pushiness. I had delivered hundreds of babies into the world, soothed countless crying infants, guided new parents through their most anxious moments. But according to Sarah, I was somehow less qualified than Brenda, who had raised exactly one child 30 years ago. "Sarah," I said, drawing on every ounce of professional composure I possessed, "I understand you're protective of Tommy. That's natural and healthy. But I'm his grandmother, and I have extensive experience with infant care. I want to support you both, not interfere with your parenting." Sarah's laugh was cold and calculating. "Support. You call showing up uninvited support. You call demanding to hold my baby support. Let me be very clear about something, Eleanor. You are not to post any photos of Tommy on Facebook without my permission. This is my baby, not yours. You're being selfish and manipulative, and frankly, you have no humanity to understand what I need as a new mother." Each word was chosen with surgical precision to inflict maximum damage while maintaining plausible deniability. Sarah wasn't just setting boundaries. She was systematically dismantling my relationship with my grandchild while making me appear unreasonable for wanting basic grandparent privileges. Michael, who should have been my advocate and defender, crumbled under Sarah's manipulation with heartbreaking completeness. "Mom, you need to respect Sarah's wishes. She just gave birth, and you're putting unnecessary pressure on her. Stop being so dramatic about this. She's Tommy's mother, and what she says goes." The betrayal in his words was devastating. This was the son I had raised alone, working multiple nanny jobs to pay for his education and opportunities. I had sacrificed everything to give him the best possible start in life. And now he was treating me like an interfering stranger who had no legitimate claim to love his child. "You're losing your mind over this," Michael continued, his voice growing sharper with each word. "You have no humanity for what we're going through as new parents. Stop being such a meddling old fool and give us some space." The phrase "meddling old fool" echoed in my mind long after he said it. 40 years of professional respect, decades of successful childcare, a lifetime of maternal devotion, all reduced to the stereotype of an interfering elderly woman who couldn't respect boundaries. But Sarah wasn't finished with her calculated humiliation. She had orchestrated something even more devastating to ensure my exclusion was complete and public. Brenda, Sarah's mother, had been documenting every moment of Tommy's early days with professional quality photographs that she immediately posted across social media platforms. The posts were carefully crafted to maximize my emotional damage while maintaining an innocent facade. "First cuddles with my precious grandson Tommy," Brenda wrote beneath a photo of herself holding my grandchild. "A grandmother's true love knows no bounds. So grateful to be the first one to welcome this little angel into the world." The comments section exploded with congratulations and heart emojis from friends and family members who had no idea about the calculated cruelty behind these posts. "So precious," people wrote. "What a lucky baby to have such a devoted grandmother." First grandchild moments are the most special. Each comment felt like another nail in the coffin of my relationship with Tommy. Brenda was being celebrated for achieving the milestone that should have been mine by right, while I was systematically erased from the narrative of his birth and early days. The isolation became complete when Sarah and Michael implemented what they called necessary boundaries, but what I recognized as systematic alienation tactics. Phone calls went unanswered, text messages were ignored, and visits were refused with increasingly elaborate excuses about Tommy's schedule, Sarah's recovery, or their need for family bonding time. When I persisted in trying to maintain contact, hoping that time might soften their position, Mr. Davies entered the picture with legal threats designed to terrorize me into complete submission. His letter was formal, cold, and calculated to make any future contact seem like criminal harassment. My clients, Michael and Sarah Thompson, have expressed serious concerns about your inappropriate attempts to interfere with their family life, Davies wrote. Any continued attempts to contact them or their minor child will be considered harassment and stalking behavior. We are prepared to seek a restraining order if this behavior continues. The legal language was designed to reframe my natural grandparent love as pathological obsession, my desire for contact as harassment, and my decades of childcare experience as dangerous interference. In one document, Davies had transformed me from a loving grandmother into a potential threat to child welfare. As I sat in my empty house that evening, surrounded by the baby gifts I had so carefully chosen and the nursery I had lovingly prepared, I felt the weight of complete isolation settling over me like a suffocating blanket. The joy I had felt anticipating Tommy's arrival had been poisoned by systematic cruelty that seemed designed not just to exclude me, but to break my spirit entirely. But buried beneath my overwhelming pain, something else was stirring. The same analytical mind that had successfully navigated thousands of complex family dynamics during my professional career was beginning to recognize patterns in Sarah's behavior that went far beyond normal new mother protectiveness. This was something more calculated, more systematic, and potentially more vulnerable to exposure than Sarah realized. The weeks following my banishment from Tommy's life brought escalating psychological warfare that revealed the true scope of Sarah's campaign against me. What I had initially hoped might be temporary new mother anxiety was emerging as a sophisticated plan to erase me completely from my grandchild's existence. Sarah's demands became increasingly unreasonable and comprehensive. She refused me any access to Tommy, even supervised visits in her own home, where she could control every interaction. When I suggested meeting at a neutral location, like a park or family restaurant, she claimed I was being manipulative and refusing to respect her authority as Tommy's mother. But more devastating than the exclusion itself was Sarah's systematic destruction of my history with their family. During one of my few permitted phone calls with Michael, I asked about the handmade layette I had spent months creating for Tommy, embroidering each tiny garment with love and anticipation. "Oh, that old stuff," Michael said dismissively. Sarah decided it wasn't really Tommy's style. She preferred the modern clothes her mom bought him. "I think we donated your things to charity." The casual cruelty of discarding months of my labor, each stitch sewn with grandmotherly love, revealed the depth of Sarah's campaign to erase my presence from Tommy's life. She wasn't just excluding me from the present. She was systematically eliminating all traces of my intended role in his future. The photo erasure was even more calculated and painful. I discovered that Sarah had removed every trace of me from Tommy's nursery and baby belongings. The pictures of Michael as a baby that I had given them to inspire their own parenting journey had been replaced with photos of Brenda's family. My professional awards and certifications, which had once hung proudly in their guest room as evidence of my childcare expertise, had disappeared entirely. When I mentioned this during a brief conversation with Michael, he claimed they were redecorating and needed to simplify the space for Tommy's development. But I recognize this as systematic historical revision designed to support Sarah's narrative that I was just the other grandmother with no significant role in their family's story. The most chilling insight into Sarah's true character came when I accidentally overheard a phone conversation she was having while I waited outside their house, hoping for just a glimpse of Tommy through the window. Her voice, cold and calculating, carried clearly through the thin walls. "The old hag thinks she can guilt-trip us into giving her access," Sarah said with casual venom. "Tommy's mine, not hers. Eleanor's just the other grandmother, and she needs to accept that her opinion doesn't matter anymore. This is what she gets for being so pushy and entitled." The calculated cruelty in her voice revealed that this wasn't about protecting Tommy or establishing reasonable boundaries. This was about power control and the systematic humiliation of someone Sarah viewed as a threat to her absolute authority over her new family. As I stood outside their home listening to my own daughter-in-law describe me as an old hag whose love for her grandchild was dismissed as manipulation, I felt something profound shift inside me. The grief and confusion I had been experiencing began to crystallize into a cold understanding of exactly what Sarah was doing and why. In that moment of devastating clarity, I was forced to confront the most painful sacrifice I had ever made for Michael, a secret I had carried alone for over 20 years. When Michael was 24 and struggling to establish himself in his career, he had developed a gambling addiction that spiraled out of control with terrifying speed. The debts he accumulated totaled nearly $150,000 money he had borrowed from increasingly dangerous sources as his addiction consumed his judgment. But the gambling was only the beginning of his problems. Desperate to repay his creditors, Michael had become involved in a cryptocurrency fraud scheme that promised enormous returns, but was actually a sophisticated money laundering operation. When federal investigators began closing in, Michael faced potential charges for financial fraud that would have resulted in years in federal prison and the complete destruction of any chance for a normal future. The scandal would have ruined not just Michael's life, but his reputation, his career prospects, and any possibility of the family life he desperately wanted. As a professional nanny with extensive connections in family services and legal circles, I understood exactly what needed to be done to save my son from the consequences of his choices. I liquidated my entire retirement account, over $75,000 I had saved through decades of careful planning and sacrifice. But money alone wasn't enough to solve Michael's crisis. I used my professional reputation and network to arrange for evidence to be suppressed, charges to be reduced, and Michael's record to be expunged through a complex series of legal maneuvers that cost me every favor I had accumulated over 20 years of childcare work. Most painfully, I convinced several of my wealthy former clients to quietly contribute to a rehabilitation fund that covered Michael's remaining debts and legal fees. I allowed them to believe I was helping a promising young person overcome temporary difficulties, never revealing that this was my own son whose addiction and poor choices had created the crisis. I kept this sacrifice completely hidden from Michael, never wanting him to feel beholden to me or to carry the guilt of knowing how much his freedom had cost. I allowed him to believe he had overcome his problems through luck, legal technicalities, and his own efforts to change his life. Now watching Sarah systematically exclude me from Tommy's life, while Michael stood passively by, the irony was unbearable. The son whose future I had purchased with my life savings was allowing his wife to treat me as if I were a dangerous stranger rather than the woman who had saved him from federal prison. When I attempted to subtly remind Michael of our bond and my lifelong commitment to his welfare, hoping to rekindle some memory of my devotion, his response was devastating in its complete dismissal of our history. "Mom, you're always trying to make me feel guilty with your so-called sacrifices," he said, his voice filled with the impatience of someone who had been coached to respond this way. "Your past choices are your own business. Sarah says you're trying to manipulate us with guilt trips and emotional blackmail." The words felt like physical blows. Not only was Michael refusing to acknowledge my sacrifices, but he was reframing them as manipulation tactics designed to control his current behavior. Sarah had successfully convinced him that my maternal love was actually a form of emotional abuse. Brenda, ever ready to support Sarah's narrative, added her own twist of psychological diagnosis to my supposed manipulation. "Honestly, Eleanor," she said during one of the few family gatherings I was still permitted to attend, "we're all getting quite concerned about your mental health. You seem to be developing some paranoid ideas about people plotting against you. Maybe you should consider talking to someone professional about these feelings." The suggestion that I needed psychiatric intervention was the final piece of Sarah's campaign to discredit my competence and authority. By questioning my mental health, she was laying the groundwork for future legal challenges to any grandparent rights I might attempt to assert. But perhaps the cruelest element of this psychological warfare was the way Sarah had begun coaching my other grandchildren, Ethan and Chloe, to participate in my humiliation. During a family barbecue that I attended, only because Michael hadn't yet told me I was banned, I overheard 8-year-old Ethan saying to his cousin, "Grandma Eleanor is acting crazy lately. Mom says she might be getting that old people disease that makes you forget things." 10-year-old Chloe added, with the innocent cruelty that only children can muster, "Yeah, she keeps trying to hold Tommy when Aunt Sarah said no. Maybe she should just die already so everyone can be happy." The words, clearly coached but delivered with childish honesty, revealed how completely Sarah had poisoned even the youngest family members against me. She wasn't content with excluding me from Tommy's life. She was systematically turning my entire extended family into participants in my psychological destruction. The final humiliation came when Sarah, through Mr. Davies, proposed what she called a family resolution that was actually a legal trap designed to formalize my exclusion while forcing me to admit incompetence. The proposed agreement would require me to permanently relinquish all grandparent visitation rights and submit to a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation designed to prove my mental instability. In return, Sarah would graciously allow me to send supervised, pre-approved letters to Tommy twice a year, letters that would be screened for inappropriate content before being shared with him. The agreement was designed to legally establish that I was unfit for unsupervised contact with children while positioning Sarah as the reasonable party trying to accommodate a mentally unstable relative. As I sat in my empty house that night, legally threatened and systematically isolated from the grandchild I had waited my entire life to love, I felt the weight of complete defeat. Sarah had successfully transformed me from a respected childcare professional into a cautionary tale about elderly relatives who couldn't accept boundaries. But buried beneath my overwhelming pain, the analytical mind that had successfully navigated thousands of complex family situations was beginning to recognize something crucial. Sarah's campaign was too sophisticated, too systematic, and too comprehensive to be the spontaneous behavior of a protective new mother. This was planned, calculated, and potentially vulnerable to the same kind of professional analysis I had once applied to troubled families in my childcare career. The legal machinery that Sarah and Davies had constructed reached its devastating climax with a document that would forever change my understanding of how completely my family had been turned against me. The restraining order arrived by certified mail on a gray Tuesday morning, its official language transforming my grandmotherly love into a criminal threat. Eleanor Matthews is hereby permanently prohibited from all contact with minor child Thomas Thompson, the order read in cold legal terminology. This includes physical proximity to the child's resident school daycare facilities or any location where the child may reasonably be expected to be present. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and criminal prosecution. But the restraining order went even further than simple contact prohibition. I was legally banned from sending gift cards or letters to Tommy. I couldn't attend family gatherings where he might be present. I couldn't even mention him in social media posts or public communications. Sarah had succeeded in making me legally invisible to my own grandchild. The grounds for the restraining order were a masterwork of character assassination disguised as child protection. Davies had crafted allegations of emotional harassment, obsessive behavior, and potential child endangerment based on my attempts to maintain a relationship with Tommy. My professional experience with infants was reframed as inappropriate interference with parental authority, and my gifts for Tommy were characterized as attempts to manipulate the child's affection. Most devastating of all, the order included a psychological evaluation requirement that would essentially place my mental competence under court supervision. Any future contact with Tommy would depend on my ability to prove my sanity to a system that had already accepted Sarah's characterization of me as an unstable, obsessive, elderly woman. The isolation was swift and comprehensive. I couldn't attend church services where Michael and Sarah might appear with Tommy. I couldn't shop at the grocery stores they frequented. I couldn't even walk in the public parks where they might take him for fresh air. Sarah had succeeded in making me a prisoner in my own community, trapped by the fear that any accidental encounter might result in my arrest. But my heart refused to accept this legal banishment as the final word on my relationship with Tommy. In my desperation to somehow reach the son I had raised and loved, I spent weeks carefully assembling a collection of our most precious memories together. I gathered photographs from Michael's childhood, his first steps, his graduation day, family vacations, where his laughter had been the soundtrack to my happiest moments. I included pictures of Tommy from his brief hospital stay, photos I had treasured as the only tangible evidence of my grandchild's existence. I wrote a letter that poured out 65 years of maternal wisdom and love, carefully avoiding any mention of the current conflict while emphasizing the unbreakable bonds that should connect grandmothers to their grandchildren. My dearest Michael, I wrote, "These pictures represent the joy you have brought into my life from the moment you were born. You were my miracle baby, my greatest achievement, my proof that love can overcome any obstacle. Now Tommy carries that same precious legacy forward, and I pray that someday he will understand how much his grandmother loved him, even when she couldn't be there to show it." I left the album on their doorstep late one evening, hoping that seeing our documented history together might soften Michael's heart, or remind him of the woman who had sacrificed everything to give him the best possible life. For 3 days, I allowed myself to hope that maybe this visual reminder of our bond might crack the wall of manipulation Sarah had built around my son. Instead, I discovered the album's fate through social media in a post that shattered whatever remained of my faith in Michael's capacity for filial love. Brenda had photographed my carefully assembled memories scattered across what appeared to be a garbage bag, the pictures torn and some partially burned. Cleaning out the clutter. Brenda's caption read, "With casual cruelty. Some people just can't let go of the past and move forward from negativity. Time to focus on healthy relationships and positive energy instead of desperate attempts to manipulate through guilt." The comments below the post were filled with supportive messages from people who had no idea they were celebrating the destruction of a grandmother's most treasured memories. "Good for you," friends wrote. "Sometimes you have to cut toxic people out of your life. Stay strong and protect your family from negativity." That image of our irreplaceable family history, reduced to literal garbage, broke something inside me that I knew would never fully heal. These weren't just photographs. They were the visual record of a love that had defined my entire adult life, moments of pure joy and connection that could never be recreated or replaced. Michael's final communication confirmed that his transformation from loving son to cruel stranger was complete. His text message arrived at 3 a.m. as if he had been lying awake planning the perfect words to inflict maximum damage. "Consider this closed, Mom. You lose. Don't contact us again, ever. You're causing too much trouble with your obsessive behavior and your pathetic attempts at emotional manipulation. I'm done pretending you were ever anything more than an interfering old woman who can't respect boundaries." The next day, Sarah escalated her public relations campaign with phone calls to mutual friends and extended family members. Her story was carefully crafted to position me as a mentally unstable elderly woman whose obsession with her grandchild had become dangerous. "We're really concerned about Eleanor's psychological state," Sarah told anyone who would listen. "She's become completely obsessed with Tommy to the point where it's affecting her grip on reality. We had to get a restraining order because her behavior was becoming genuinely frightening." The narrative was so convincing, so reasonable sounding, that most people accepted it without question. After all, everyone had heard stories about elderly relatives who became difficult or inappropriate as they aged. Sarah's version of events fit perfectly into existing stereotypes about aging and family dynamics. But in my moment of absolute despair, I was forced to confront the most painful secret of my entire life, a truth I had shared with no one and had hoped to take to my grave. The weight of this secret, combined with everything Sarah and Michael were putting me through, finally broke my resolve to protect everyone else at the expense of my own well-being. In a moment of raw desperation, I called my family therapist, Ally, and revealed something that would change everything if it ever became public. Tommy's birth hadn't been the straightforward, healthy delivery that everyone believed. My grandson had been born with a severe, life-threatening genetic condition that required immediate surgery, costing over $150,000. The condition was so rare and complex that standard insurance wouldn't cover the experimental procedures needed to save his life. Without immediate intervention, Tommy would have died within his first months of life. Michael and Sarah, young and financially struggling, had no way to afford the treatment their son desperately needed. They were facing the impossible choice between watching their child die or accumulating debt that would destroy their financial future for decades. So I had made another impossible sacrifice, liquidating my remaining retirement savings and borrowing against my home to secretly pay for Tommy's life-saving surgery. I worked with the medical team to create a fiction about unexpected insurance coverage and charitable medical funds that allowed Michael and Sarah to believe their son's treatment had been covered by sources beyond their control. For 3 months, while Tommy underwent complex procedures and recovery treatments, I was the one paying every medical bill, covering every specialist consultation, funding every piece of equipment needed to keep my grandson alive. I coordinated with doctors' managed insurance claims and ensured that Michael and Sarah never saw the true cost of their son's survival. I kept this sacrifice completely hidden because I wanted them to focus on loving and caring for Tommy rather than drowning in guilt or financial anxiety. I thought my silence was a gift, a way to protect their family bond and ensure that Tommy would grow up in a home free from the stress of overwhelming medical debt. Now, as I sat in my empty house, legally prohibited from seeing the grandchild whose life I had saved, the cosmic irony was unbearable. The baby whose existence I had purchased with my life savings was being kept from me by parents who had no idea how much his survival had cost. The woman who had quietly ensured Tommy could grow up healthy and loved was being portrayed as a dangerous threat to his well-being. Sarah's systematic exclusion and Michael's passive complicity weren't just cruel, they were a complete inversion of reality. The woman they characterized as just the other grandmother was actually the reason their son was alive to be fought over. My interference had been the salvation of their family, and my obsessive behavior was nothing more than a grandmother's natural desire to love the child she had literally saved. But buried beneath my overwhelming pain and the devastating irony of my situation, something else was stirring the same professional instincts that had protected countless children during my 40-year career. For the first time since this nightmare began, I started thinking like the child care expert I had been rather than the heartbroken grandmother I had become. Sarah's campaign against me was too sophisticated, too systematic, and too comprehensive to be the spontaneous behavior of a protective new mother. This was planned psychological warfare, and like all forms of calculated cruelty, it would eventually reveal patterns that could be exposed and challenged. The final battle for my grandson's love and my own dignity was about to begin. The restraining order created a psychological prison more suffocating than any physical confinement I had ever experienced. In the weeks that followed, I found myself trapped in a terrifying abyss of isolation, haunted by the monumental secret of Tommy's hidden medical history and the life-saving sacrifice I had made in silence. Every morning brought the crushing realization that the truth which could vindicate me was the same truth that would destroy the peaceful fiction Michael and Sarah lived within. The weight of concealing Tommy's near-death experience and my financial rescue felt unbearable in my isolation. I would lie awake at night replaying those terrifying months when my grandson hovered between life and death, remembering the desperate phone calls to specialists, the sleepless nights spent researching experimental treatments, the quiet conversations with medical billing departments as I arranged payment for procedures that cost more than most people's homes. That same secret now felt like evidence of my supposed mental instability. How could I explain to anyone that the grandmother they portrayed as dangerously obsessed had actually saved her grandchild's life? How could I reveal that my inappropriate interference had been the difference between Tommy's survival and death? The truth seemed so extraordinary that speaking it aloud would only confirm Sarah's narrative about my delusional state. But Sarah and Davies weren't content with my private torment. They escalated their public campaign with surgical precision, targeting the professional reputation I had built over 40 years of dedicated childcare. Davies began discreetly contacting nanny associations and child development networks, spreading carefully crafted concerns about my mental competence and emotional stability. I'm calling out of professional obligation. Davies told the director of the National Nanny Association during a conversation I later learned about through sympathetic colleagues. Eleanor Matthews, one of your long-standing members, appears to be experiencing significant cognitive decline that's manifesting as obsessive attachment behaviors toward a grandchild. Her recent actions suggest she may be developing inappropriate emotional dependencies that could affect her judgment regarding child welfare. The campaign was devastatingly effective. My reputation for highly perceptive care and unshakable professional integrity, built over 4 decades of successful placements and satisfied families, was systematically dismantled through whispered concerns and professional warnings. Speaking engagements at child development conferences were quietly canceled. Professional organizations removed my name from advisory boards where I had served for decades. Former colleagues began treating me with the careful sympathy reserved for aging professionals who were losing their grip on reality. Phone calls went unreturned, invitations stopped arriving, and when I encountered other nannies at community events, I could see the doubt in their eyes, mixed with pity for someone who had supposedly been overcome by the emotional instability of advanced age. Eleanor, one former colleague said carefully when she encountered me at the grocery store, "People are saying you've been having some difficulties with family boundaries. Maybe it would be good to take a step back from childcare activities for a while, just to focus on your own well-being." The financial devastation followed with cruel efficiency. The escalating legal fees from defending myself against Sarah's visitation termination and her subsequent defamation lawsuit completely drained the modest savings I had left after paying for Tommy's medical care. My bank accounts were frozen pending investigation of financial irregularities in my management of childcare-related expenses, leaving me without access to money I had earned through decades of honest work. The eviction from my cherished home was the culmination of Sarah's systematic destruction of my life. The house where I had raised Michael, where I had prepared a nursery for Tommy with such hope and love, was sold at public auction to cover my mounting legal debts. Strangers walked through rooms filled with 40 years of childcare memories, commenting on the excessive number of family photographs and the outdated nursery equipment I had collected for my grandchildren. My remaining possessions were scattered across the lawn like the remnants of a career that no longer mattered. Professional certifications awards for excellence in childcare, letters of recommendation from grateful families, all reduced to lot numbers in an estate sale that drew curious neighbors eager to witness the fall of someone who had once been respected in their community. The homeless shelter was a crowded impersonal facility where I became just another elderly woman whose family had abandoned her. I lay on a thin mattress, listening to the sounds of other broken lives, trying to reconcile the woman I had been with the reality of my current circumstances. But perhaps the cruelest blow was yet to come. Michael and Sarah orchestrated a public relations event that weaponized my other grandchildren against me in the most systematic way possible. They leveraged 10-year-old Ethan and 8-year-old Chloe in a charity event for something called the Child Protection Foundation, an organization supposedly dedicated to protective parenting and safeguarding children from emotional manipulation. I learned about the event from a former nanny trainee who sent me a link with a warning that I might not want to watch. But I couldn't resist the desperate need to see my grandchildren, even if it meant witnessing my own destruction. There was Ethan standing confidently at a podium, delivering a speech that had clearly been written by adults and rehearsed for maximum emotional impact. Sometimes there are people in families who think they know better than parents. He said, his young voice steady and confident. Brave parents have to protect their children from difficult people who don't understand boundaries. It's important to support parents who make hard choices to keep their families safe. 8-year-old Chloe followed with an art presentation displaying a drawing of a happy, protected family that conspicuously excluded any figure that could represent me. "This is my picture of what families look like when children are safe," she explained to the audience with heartbreaking innocence. "When parents are strong enough to keep difficult people away." The message was unmistakable. I was the threat from which children needed protection. The difficult person whose love was actually manipulation, the source of family dysfunction that required legal intervention. My own grandchildren, whom I had once hoped to spoil with grandmother love, had been programmed to see me as someone dangerous and unwelcome. This public display of emotional distance by children I adored felt like a wound that would never heal. Ethan and Chloe had been coached to participate in my destruction without understanding what they were doing, their innocence corrupted to serve Sarah's narrative of protective parenting. As I sat in the shelter that night, surrounded by the sounds of other people's despair, I felt myself sinking into a darkness so profound that I began to understand why some people simply stopped fighting. The combination of legal threats, financial ruin, professional destruction, and family rejection felt like more than any human being should be expected to endure. But then, like a miracle emerging from my darkest moment, my phone rang with a call that would change everything. The voice belonged to Jennifer Walsh, a young woman I had trained as a nanny 25 years ago when she was just starting her career in childcare. She was now a respected leader in child welfare advocacy, and she had been following my situation with growing alarm and disbelief. "Eleanor?" she said, her voice filled with warmth and absolute certainty. "I've been watching what's happening to you, and I want you to know that none of it makes sense to anyone who actually knows your character. You saved my career when I was a struggling young nanny. You taught me that child welfare always comes first, that protecting children sometimes means making unpopular decisions, and that true nurturing requires both love and wisdom." Jennifer offered immediate financial support to help me mount a proper legal defense, and more importantly, she connected me with a network of retired legal professionals who specialized in elder abuse, family manipulation, and grandparent rights cases. For the first time in months, I was hearing voices of people who understood that my love for Tommy was not obsession, but the natural affection of a grandmother who had been systematically excluded from her grandchild's life. "We've seen cases like this before," one of the attorneys told me during our first consultation. Adult children who use sophisticated legal and psychological tactics to isolate elderly family members for control purposes. What makes your case particularly disturbing is the level of professional manipulation involved, but that also means there will be documented evidence we can analyze and challenge. As I hung up the phone that night, something fierce and determined stirred within me for the first time since Tommy's birth. Sarah and Michael thought they had broken me completely, erased me from their family's story, silenced my voice forever. But they had forgotten something crucial about professional nannies. We don't just care for children. We protect them, document concerning behaviors, and ensure that truth eventually prevails when their welfare is at stake. The war for my dignity and my grandchild's future was far from over. Jennifer's support had rekindled hope within me, but Sarah's campaign of destruction was entering a new and more sophisticated phase. If anything, my small network of allies seemed to motivate her to escalate her efforts in ways that demonstrated just how calculating and comprehensive her plan to erase me had become. What Sarah orchestrated next was so professionally devastating and personally cruel that it revealed the true scope of her psychological warfare. She leveraged Michael's social standing in their community and cultivated a network of ethically compromised child psychologists to organize what she called a modern parenting and emotional wellness seminar. The event was positioned as a prestigious regional conference, bringing together parenting experts, child development specialists, and family therapists to discuss contemporary approaches to child rearing and protecting children from outdated parenting philosophies. But I quickly recognized it as an elaborate public execution of my professional legacy and life's work. Michael was announced as the keynote speaker, presenting what he described as a revolutionary case study on fostering childhood resilience and independence. Though he never mentioned our family by name, every detail was clearly based on Tommy's early childhood and my supposed interference in his development, but twisted beyond recognition to support their narrative. Today, I want to share how our family overcame the challenge of well-meaning but emotionally harmful influences from previous generations. Michael announced to an audience of hundreds with thousands more watching the live stream. Sometimes love can become possessive and caring can become controlling, especially when older family members struggle to accept that parenting methods have evolved. I learned about the seminar from Jennifer, who had been monitoring Sarah and Michael's activities and was horrified by what she discovered. "Eleanor," she said, her voice shaking with anger, "they're using your own professional principles against you. Everything you taught about child development and nurturing relationships, they're twisting into evidence of emotional manipulation." From my small room in transitional housing that Jennifer had helped me secure, I watched the seminar's live stream on a borrowed tablet, witnessing the systematic dismantling of everything I had believed about child welfare and family love. Michael stood confidently at the podium, presenting himself as a visionary parent who had transformed his children's emotional development despite the challenges of over-involved extended family. Traditional childcare approaches, Michael said with practiced authority, often emphasize emotional dependency and excessive caretaker involvement that can actually harm a child's ability to develop healthy independence. We see this particularly in older caregivers who mistake control for love and interference for support. Every word was calculated to portray my 40 years of childcare expertise as outdated at best, emotionally damaging at worst. He spoke about the danger of permissive caregiving styles that create anxious attachment and the importance of protecting children from adults who project their own emotional needs onto vulnerable young minds. Sarah appeared alongside Michael, providing what she called real-world examples of how families could overcome generational trauma caused by emotionally needy relatives who couldn't respect parental authority. Her performance was masterful, positioning herself as a protective mother who had courageously defended her children from psychological manipulation disguised as grandmotherly love. What we discovered, Sarah told the interviewer with practiced vulnerability, was that some family members were using their supposed childcare expertise to justify inappropriate emotional demands on our children. They would claim that their years of experience gave them special insight, but really, they were projecting their own need for control and relevance onto our family dynamic. But the most devastating moment came when they introduced video testimonials from Tommy himself. My 5-year-old grandson appeared in a carefully produced segment that had obviously been professionally filmed and extensively coached. "I like being independent," Tommy said, looking directly into the camera with the practiced confidence of a child who had been repeatedly rehearsed. "I don't need people to hold me all the time or tell me what to do. My mommy and daddy help me be strong and make my own choices." The subtext was unmistakable. My desire to hold and nurture Tommy was being reframed as emotional, smothering my grandmother love, portrayed as psychological pressure that interfered with his healthy development. My own grandson was being used to publicly declare that he was better off without my influence in his life. Ethan's appearance was even more calculated and cruel. Now 12 years old and clearly influenced by years of Sarah's narrative, he appeared in a short video clip, giggling, as he held up one of my old nanny training manuals. "Grandma Eleanor used to make us read these boring old books about taking care of kids," he said with teenage disdain that was clearly rehearsed but delivered with convincing spontaneity. But we learned that all that old-fashioned stuff just makes kids worried and dependent. We prefer independent parenting that lets children be free. The audience laughed appreciatively at his youthful wisdom, never knowing they were witnessing a child who had been systematically programmed to reject his grandmother's life's work. Everything I had tried to teach my grandchildren about the importance of nurturing relationships and emotional security was being reframed as psychological manipulation that had held them back. As the seminar continued, I sat trembling in my chair, watching decades of professional accomplishment being perverted into a cautionary tale about the dangers of over-involved grandparents and outdated childcare philosophies. Michael fielded questions from the audience with the confidence of someone who had completely convinced himself that he was protecting his children from a genuinely harmful influence. "How do you deal with family members who refuse to accept new parenting approaches?" someone asked from the audience. "It's heartbreaking," Michael replied, his voice filled with practiced pain. "Sometimes you have to choose between enabling someone's need for control and protecting your children's emotional development. The most loving thing you can do is set firm boundaries even when other family members try to make you feel guilty for prioritizing your children's well-being." The comment section of the live stream was filled with supportive messages praising Michael and Sarah's courage in standing up to toxic family dynamics and protecting their children from generational manipulation. Thousands of strangers were celebrating the destruction of my professional reputation as if they were witnessing a triumph of modern parenting over outdated attitudes. But something else was happening that Sarah and Michael couldn't see or control. Jennifer had quietly reached out to several of my former colleagues and the families I had served during my 40-year career, people who understood my actual approach to childcare and could recognize the distortion being presented at the seminar. Dr. Margaret Thompson, a respected pediatrician who had worked with me on dozens of cases over the years, was watching the seminar with growing disgust and professional alarm. After Michael's presentation ended, she immediately contacted Jennifer with an offer to provide expert testimony about my character and methods. "What I'm seeing is a sophisticated character assassination designed to exploit public misunderstanding of professional child care principles," Dr. Thompson told Jennifer. "Everything Michael is describing as Eleanor's emotional overreach is actually the opposite of her established methods. she was known throughout our professional community for her ability to balance nurturing support with healthy independence building. Other childcare professionals were reaching similar conclusions. The very sophistication of Michael and Sarah's attack was beginning to work against them, revealing patterns that experienced child development experts recognized as manipulation rather than legitimate concern about outdated practices. As I closed the tablet that evening, unable to watch any more of my life's work being perverted into evidence of my supposed harmfulness to children, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began: a cold, analytical understanding of what Sarah and Michael were really doing. They weren't just trying to exclude me from Tommy's life or protect him from an allegedly harmful influence. This was a systematic attempt to rewrite the entire narrative of professional childcare, positioning themselves as enlightened modern parents who had overcome the emotional manipulation of previous generations. But in their eagerness to completely destroy my professional legacy, they had also created a documented trail of their own manipulation tactics that could be analyzed and exposed by people who truly understood child development and family dynamics. For the first time since Tommy's birth, I began to think like the childcare professional I had been, rather than the heartbroken grandmother I had become. And what I saw gave me the first real hope I had felt in months. Michael and Sarah were overplaying their hand, and people who truly understood children and families were beginning to notice the disturbing patterns in their behavior. The success of the Modern Parenting Seminar seemed to embolden Michael and Sarah for what could only be described as total financial warfare. The public attention and professional validation they had received from positioning themselves as enlightened parents protecting their children from toxic family influences had fed something dark and insatiable within them. They weren't content with excluding me from Tommy's life or destroying my professional reputation. They wanted complete economic annihilation, the total erasure of every resource I might use to fight back. The final assault came in the form of a lawsuit, so comprehensive and vindictive that it took my breath away. Michael filed a $1 million claim against me, alleging intentional infliction of emotional distress and systematic defamation, resulting from what he characterized as my decades-long campaign of psychological manipulation and financial exploitation of their family. The lawsuit was frivolous, but legally sophisticated, designed to force me into massive legal fees that would completely drain whatever resources Jennifer's support network had temporarily provided. Michael's attorney had crafted the complaint with surgical precision, weaving together fabricated accusations about my child care methods with careful legal language that made my past sacrifices for their family sound like evidence of controlling and financially manipulative behavior. The defendant has engaged in a pattern of financial and emotional manipulation spanning decades. The lawsuit claimed using her supposed professional expertise and claimed sacrifices to exert inappropriate control over the plaintiff's family life and parenting decisions. But the financial attack extended far beyond the lawsuit itself. Michael had systematically contacted my former nanny agency, my professional liability insurance company, and even my pension fund administrators, filing detailed complaints that painted me as mentally incompetent and professionally dangerous. We have serious concerns about Eleanor Matthews's cognitive state and her fitness to have been involved in childcare, Michael wrote in letters that were somehow leaked to professional publications. Her recent obsessive behavior toward our family suggests possible dementia or other cognitive impairments that may have affected her professional judgment for years. We believe there may be undisclosed incidents with other families that warrant investigation. The bureaucratic machinery moved with terrifying efficiency. Within weeks, I received official notification that my professional nanny pension was being suspended pending a competency evaluation and investigation into potential professional misconduct. My child care certifications were revoked based on Michael's allegations of gross ethical violations and inappropriate emotional attachment to clients. 40 years of flawless professional service, thousands of children successfully cared for decades of grateful families whose lives I had enriched and supported, all erased with a few administrative signatures based on the lies of a son who had no memory of how I had saved his life and secured his future. Without my pension facing legal fees that multiplied daily with my professional reputation, destroyed and my ability to earn income eliminated, I faced complete financial ruin. The transitional housing facility Jennifer had helped me secure was no longer affordable, and I found myself facing homelessness once again. The eviction from my final refuge was orchestrated with deliberate cruelty, designed to maximize my public humiliation. Brenda Sarah's mother had somehow arranged for local media coverage of my removal, ensuring that my personal disgrace was documented and broadcast throughout our community. The image of a former professional nanny carrying her few remaining possessions in garbage bags appeared in local newspapers under headlines like "Child Care Professional Unable to Care for Herself" and "Former Nanny's Obsession Leads to Homelessness." The photos were deliberately framed to make me appear frail, confused, and potentially dangerous, supporting Sarah's narrative about my declining mental state. I returned to the crowded overnight shelter where I was surrounded by the sounds of other broken lives. The contrast between my current circumstances and the respect I had once commanded in professional childcare circles was so stark that it felt surreal, like watching someone else's nightmare unfold in slow motion. Michael and Sarah's response to my complete destitution was perhaps more painful than their act of cruelty had been. They maintained a chilling indifference to my homelessness that revealed the depth of their emotional disconnection from the woman who had raised and protected them. When approached by a sympathetic journalist who asked about their mother's and mother-in-law's situation, Michael publicly stated that he had no legal or moral obligation to support someone who refuses to take responsibility for the consequences of their own inappropriate behavior. My mother made choices that led to this situation, he said, his voice cold and emotionless during a brief television interview. She chose to pursue an obsessive relationship with our child rather than respect our boundaries as parents. We can't sacrifice our family's well-being to enable her continued inability to accept appropriate limits. Sarah's response was equally heartless, but more calculated in its cruelty. She maintained an active social media presence, showcasing their happy family life, carefully posting images of Tommy's developmental milestones and family activities that conspicuously excluded any reference to my existence. When followers asked about the grandmother situation they had heard about in the news, Sarah would respond with carefully crafted statements about hoping everyone gets the mental health support they need and focusing on positive relationships that support our children's growth. But perhaps the most twisted demonstration of their complete victory came when Brenda used funds that had been intended for Tommy's college education to purchase what she called a child wellness center in his name. The facility, complete with modern playground equipment and educational resources, was built using money that Michael and Sarah had received through various fundraising efforts and family financial support that had originally been meant to secure Tommy's future. The grand opening was a highly publicized community event that Brenda promoted as a symbol of protective parenting and child advocacy. She spoke at the dedication ceremony about Sarah's strength and vision in protecting her children from harmful influences, while standing in a building that had been purchased with resources originally intended to benefit the grandchild I was now forbidden to see. Photographs of the gleaming facility, complete with a bronze plaque dedicating it to modern parenting principles and child protection, were shared widely across Brenda's social media platforms. She stood proudly at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, surrounded by community leaders and fellow parents who praised the family's commitment to child welfare, never knowing they were celebrating a monument built on the systematic destruction of a grandmother's relationship with her grandchild. The physical and emotional toll of this relentless siege finally overwhelmed my body's ability to cope. One morning in the shelter, as I struggled to get dressed, with hands that shook from constant stress and malnutrition, a crushing pain seized my chest. The room spun around me, and I collapsed onto the concrete floor, my body finally surrendering to the immense pressure I had been carrying for months. The heart attack was severe and nearly fatal. I was rushed to the emergency room unconscious, my life hanging by a thread, while Sarah's social media followers continued to celebrate her latest posts about Tommy's development and their family's happiness. For hours, I drifted between consciousness and darkness, isolated and abandoned by everyone except Jennifer and the small network of professionals who had begun to see through Sarah and Michael's elaborate deception. But even in my unconscious state, my mind was working through the devastating realization that had been building for months. As I lay barely clinging to life, I experienced a vivid dream-like memory that felt more real than my present circumstances. I was back in my office 20 years ago, conducting a family counseling session that had troubled me for weeks afterward. The case involved a mother who had successfully convinced Child Protective Services, family court, and even other family members that her ex-husband was emotionally abusive and potentially dangerous to their children. The woman's tactics had been sophisticated and systematic, documenting concerning behaviors that were actually normal parental interactions, reframing the father's love for his children as inappropriate attachment, and using professional-sounding psychological language to make her allegations seem credible and objective. In my dream, the fragmented pieces of that old case suddenly coalesced into a complete chilling realization. Sarah's methods, her systematic documentation of my supposed inappropriate behavior, her alliance with legal and medical professionals, her reframing of grandmotherly love as psychological manipulation, were identical to the patterns I had professionally witnessed in that disturbing case from decades past. She wasn't simply a protective, new mother establishing reasonable boundaries. This was sophisticated psychological warfare being executed by someone who understood exactly how to manipulate family court systems, professional opinions, and public perception to achieve complete control while maintaining the appearance of victimhood. The recognition hit me like lightning, even in my unconscious state. I had spent my career protecting children from exactly this kind of systematic manipulation, and now I was the target of the most sophisticated campaign of psychological abuse I had ever encountered. As I lay there barely alive, that realization ignited something deep within me, the same professional instincts that had protected countless children during my 4-decade career. My body might be failing, but my understanding of what Sarah was doing had become crystal clear. I had dedicated my life to ensuring children's welfare and exposing those who would harm them through manipulation and deceit. Now, even if it killed me, I was going to use everything I had learned to expose the most dangerous family manipulator I had ever encountered, the one who was systematically destroying her own child's relationship with his grandmother. My recovery from the heart attack was slow and painful, but it brought with it a clarity of purpose I hadn't possessed since Tommy's birth. Jennifer and her network of professionals had been quietly building a case that would expose Sarah's systematic manipulation while I lay in that hospital bed, finally understanding the true scope of what we were fighting against. From my hospital room, surrounded by machines monitoring my fragile heart, I made a decision that would either restore my relationship with my grandson or complete my destruction. With the help of Maria, a compassionate nurse who had become invested in my story after hearing about the case from Jennifer, I recorded a raw emotional video message that laid out the truth about Sarah's character and the lengths to which she had gone to erase me from Tommy's life. My voice was still weak from the heart attack, occasionally trembling with exhaustion, but my words carried the weight of professional authority earned through 4 decades of child advocacy and a grandmother's desperate love. Michael. I began looking directly into the camera despite my physical frailty. I know Sarah has convinced you that I'm a danger to your family, but I need you to understand something that she has never wanted you to know about Tommy's first months of life. I played carefully selected excerpts from the security camera recordings that had captured Sarah's calculated discussions about excluding me from Tommy's life. Her voice, clear and unmistakable, revealed the cold manipulation behind her claims of protective parenting. Listen to her tone, I said, pausing the recording. That's not the voice of a mother protecting her child from a genuinely harmful influence. That's someone strategically planning to isolate a family member for control purposes. This is your wife, calculating how to eliminate me from Tommy's life while making it appear that she's acting in his best interest. I revealed carefully measured details about Tommy's hidden medical history, explaining how his life had hung in the balance during those first critical months, and how I had quietly arranged and paid for the experimental treatments that saved him. I provided enough documentation to prove my claims without compromising ongoing legal strategies. I spent every penny of my remaining savings to ensure that Tommy would survive his first year, I said, my voice strengthening with conviction. I arranged for specialists, coordinated complex medical procedures, and managed insurance issues that would have bankrupted your young family. I never asked for gratitude or recognition, but now Sarah is using my love for the child whose life I saved as evidence that I'm obsessed and dangerous. The video ended with a direct appeal to whatever remained of Michael's filial love and basic human decency. Please, I said, tears streaming down my face, but my voice steady, don't let her rewrite our entire family history. Don't let Tommy grow up believing that his grandmother was a threat rather than the person who ensured he survived to have a future. Maria helped me send the video to Michael's personal email account, bypassing Sarah's social media channels and public personas to reach him directly. We waited anxiously for some response, hoping that finally seeing irrefutable evidence of Sarah's manipulation might break through the wall of lies she had built around my son. But our hope was catastrophically misplaced. Sarah, who had somehow gained access to Michael's electronic communications through sophisticated monitoring software, intercepted my message before he could see it. What she did next demonstrated a level of technical sophistication and calculated cruelty that revealed the true extent of her psychological warfare capabilities. Sarah took my raw emotional video and my carefully preserved audio evidence and systematically manipulated them using professional-grade digital editing software. She altered the pacing and inflection of my voice to make me sound paranoid and irrational. She spliced segments out of context, added unsettling background music, and cut sentences to completely change their meaning. The result was a grotesque distortion of my message that made me appear delusional, vindictive, and potentially dangerous. My desperate pleas for truth were reframed as grandiose paranoid fantasies and manipulative attempts to blackmail family members with fabricated medical claims. The audio evidence of Sarah's manipulation was either removed entirely or distorted beyond recognition. Sarah then sold this heavily doctored video to a prominent national tabloid news program, presenting it as exclusive evidence of my complete mental breakdown and the dangerous delusions of an elderly woman who had lost all touch with reality. This heartbreaking video shows just how far my mother-in-law's mental illness has progressed. Sarah told the news anchor with perfectly practiced concern. She's now creating elaborate conspiracy theories involving secret medical procedures and hidden family finances. She's even claiming that she somehow saved Tommy's life when he was perfectly healthy at birth. It's devastating to watch someone deteriorate this way. The story went viral within hours, spreading across multiple news networks and social media platforms. Commentators discussed my tragic decline and the impossible position Sarah and Michael faced in dealing with a family member who had clearly lost her grip on reality. The manipulated video was played repeatedly each viewing, further cementing the narrative of my mental instability and Sarah's patient victimhood. But Sarah wasn't satisfied with simply discrediting my message. She convinced Michael to appear on national television for what she called a healing interview about the challenges of dealing with elderly family members who develop obsessive delusions about grandchildren. I watched in complete horror as my son, tears streaming down his face, expressed profound sadness over my deteriorating condition and asked the public to respect their family's privacy during this incredibly difficult time. My mother was once a capable professional woman. Michael said, his voice breaking with what appeared to be genuine emotion, but was actually carefully rehearsed performance. But something has changed dramatically in recent years. She's become completely obsessed with conspiracy theories about our family and convinced that everyone is plotting against her. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you love lose their connection to reality this way. Michael brought 12-year-old Ethan onto the camera with him, my grandson looking appropriately sad and concerned as he delivered what were clearly coached lines about wishing Grandma Eleanor could get the help she needs and hoping she can find peace instead of being angry all the time. The interview was a masterpiece of manipulation, portraying Sarah as the long-suffering daughter-in-law trying to protect her family from an increasingly unstable relative, and Michael as the devoted son torn between love and necessary self-protection. Brenda appeared alongside them, offering professional credibility to their narrative about my supposed mental decline. Sometimes, Brenda said with practiced sympathy, loving someone means protecting both them and yourself from the harm that untreated mental illness can cause. We're hoping Eleanor will eventually accept the help she needs, but we can't sacrifice our children's emotional security while we wait for that to happen. The national interview succeeded in cementing my public image as a delusional, potentially dangerous woman whose own family had been forced to take legal action for their own safety. Any attempt I might make to defend myself would now be dismissed as further evidence of my deteriorating mental state and my inability to accept reality. But something was happening that Sarah couldn't control or manipulate. Jennifer's network of child development professionals had been quietly analyzing Sarah's digital manipulation techniques and building a comprehensive case that exposed her sophisticated fraud operation. Dr. Susan Chen, a renowned expert in digital forensics and family manipulation cases, had been meticulously analyzing the doctored video Sarah had released. Her preliminary findings revealed extensive evidence of professional-grade editing software being used to alter my voice patterns, facial expressions, and the context of my statements. What we're seeing here is not the confused rambling of someone with mental health issues, Dr. Chen explained to Jennifer during a confidential briefing. This level of digital manipulation requires expensive software technical expertise and significant premeditation. Someone paid professionals to create this distortion, which suggests a coordinated conspiracy rather than a family simply sharing concerning behavior from an elderly relative. More importantly, Dr. Chen's investigation into Sarah's background had uncovered evidence of previous manipulative behavior in other relationships and a pattern of using legal and psychological tactics to isolate people who threatened her control. Your daughter-in-law has a documented history of this kind of behavior, Dr. Chen told me during my first meeting after being released from the hospital. She's not just manipulating your family relationships. She's running a sophisticated psychological warfare operation designed to maintain absolute control while destroying anyone who might challenge her authority. As I sat in Jennifer's guest room that night, still weak from the heart attack, but mentally clearer than I had been in months, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Tommy's birth, a cold professional determination to expose the truth, regardless of the personal cost. Sarah had made a critical error in her eagerness to destroy me completely. In creating such an elaborate and public campaign of character assassination, she had also created a documented trail of sophisticated manipulation that could be analyzed and exposed by experts who understood exactly what she was doing. The war for my dignity and my grandson's future was about to enter its final phase, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I had weapons that could match Sarah's sophisticated arsenal of lies and manipulation. My recovery from the heart attack had been slow but transformative, giving me not just physical strength, but an unwavering clarity about what needed to be done. Jennifer's support network had grown into a formidable legal team, and through careful investigation, we had discovered a legal settlement I had forgotten about from a workplace injury decades ago that provided the resources we needed for a proper counterattack. I hired 3 of the most respected professionals in their fields, Dr. Susan Chen, the digital forensics expert who had already begun analyzing Sarah's manipulation techniques, Margaret Torres, a renowned family law attorney who specialized in grandparent rights and elder abuse cases, and Jennifer herself, whose reputation in child welfare advocacy lent tremendous credibility to our cause. Together, we launched a massive federal civil and criminal lawsuit against Sarah Michael and their accomplices for elder abuse, emotional abuse of Tommy parental alienation, and national defamation. The case immediately attracted global attention, not just because of the viral nature of Sarah's previous campaigns, but because it represented a landmark challenge to sophisticated family manipulation tactics. The trial began on a crisp December morning, with the courthouse packed to capacity and cameras broadcasting the proceedings worldwide. As I walked into that courtroom, supported by Jennifer and my legal team, I felt the weight of every grandmother who had been systematically excluded from their grandchildren's lives, every elderly person who had been silenced by family members who exploited their love and trust. Sarah and Michael entered with their remaining legal support, still projecting confidence despite the mounting evidence against them. They had no idea what was waiting for them. When Dr. Chen stood to present our opening evidence, the courtroom fell into expectant silence. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying the authority of decades of forensic experience, "we have video and audio evidence that will demonstrate the systematic psychological warfare conducted against Eleanor Matthews by individuals who exploited her maternal love to commit serious crimes against her person, her reputation, and her fundamental right to love her grandchild." The first piece of evidence was a revelation that stunned even me. During my months of preparation for Tommy's arrival, I had purchased what appeared to be a decorative teddy bear for his nursery, not realizing it contained a hidden security camera installed by the manufacturer for child safety monitoring. The device had been recording continuously since Tommy's birth, capturing conversations and interactions that no one knew were being documented. The footage began to play on large screens positioned around the courtroom. Sarah's voice, clear and unmistakable, filled the space as she spoke with calculated coldness about her plans to exclude me from Tommy's life. "The old woman thinks she has rights to my baby," Sarah said during a phone conversation that had been captured just days after Tommy's birth. "She keeps talking about her professional experience and acting like she knows better than me about caring for my own child. I need to establish immediately that I'm in control here, not her." The conversation continued with chilling detail as Sarah outlined her strategy for creating infection risk concerns to justify excluding me from the hospital and early bonding periods. "I'll tell everyone she might expose Tommy to germs because older people carry more bacteria. It sounds medical enough that people won't question it, and it gives me a reason to keep her away during the most important bonding time." But the most damaging evidence came from recordings captured weeks later, showing Sarah and Michael explicitly discussing their plan to systematically alienate me from Tommy's life while making it appear that I was the problem. "Your mother is going to be persistent about this grandmother thing," Sarah told Michael with calculating precision. "We need to make it clear that her interference is harmful to Tommy's development. Every time she tries to hold him or give advice, we document it as inappropriate boundary crossing. Eventually, we'll have enough evidence to get legal protection from her harassment." Michael's response revealed the depth of his complicity and betrayal. "I know Mom means well, but Sarah's right that we need to protect our family dynamic. If Mom can't respect our parenting decisions, then maybe she doesn't deserve access to Tommy." The footage showed them coaching Ethan and Chloe to repeat phrases about uncomfortable visits with me and feeling scared when I tried to help with Tommy. The systematic corruption of children's perceptions was captured in horrifying detail, revealing how Sarah had weaponized my other grandchildren against me. Most devastating of all was a recording from just before my restraining order, where Sarah gave Michael explicit instructions on how to handle my increasing desperation. "When she starts crying or getting emotional, that's when you know the manipulation is working," Sarah said with chilling expertise. "Don't let her guilt trip you with stories about her sacrifices or her professional experience. Remember, she's the problem here, not us." When Dr. Evans, the pediatrician who had supported Sarah's infection risk claims, was called to testify, the combination of video evidence and cross-examination completely broke down his professional facade. Confronted with recordings of Sarah coaching him on what medical concerns to emphasize, he collapsed under the weight of his complicity. "She convinced me that Mrs. Matthews was exhibiting concerning attachment behaviors," Dr. Evans sobbed on the witness stand, his career and reputation crumbling in real time. Sarah presented herself as a protective mother dealing with an overly intrusive relative. I should have recognized the manipulation, but she was very convincing about the potential psychological harm to the child. Dr. Evans's confession opened the floodgates for other professionals to reveal how Sarah had manipulated their expert opinions to support her campaign against me. The pattern was clear and devastating. Sarah had systematically corrupted professional judgments to create an appearance of medical and psychological consensus about my supposed unfitness as a grandmother. When Sarah was finally called to testify in her own defense, the transformation was shocking and complete. The confident manipulator who had entered the courtroom was gone, replaced by someone who appeared to be having a total psychological breakdown. Confronted with hours of her own recorded words and the testimony of her co-conspirators, Sarah's carefully constructed facade shattered entirely. I was just trying to protect my family. She stammered, her voice barely audible as tears streamed down her face. Eleanor was so controlling, so demanding. I felt like she was trying to take Tommy away from me, like she thought she knew better than his actual mother. But as more recordings played revealing the calculated nature of her campaign and the deliberate cruelty of her tactics, Sarah's composure completely disintegrated. She began sobbing uncontrollably, her body shaking as the full magnitude of her psychological warfare was exposed for the world to see. I never meant for it to go this far. She wailed, her voice breaking with what appeared to be genuine horror at her own actions. I just wanted to be Tommy's only grandmother. I wanted to be the most important woman in his life. The sight of her complete collapse was both vindicating and heartbreaking. This was the woman who had systematically destroyed my relationship with my grandson, reduced to a broken shell of her former self by the exposure of her own cruelty. Michael's breakdown was even more devastating to witness. Hearing the recordings of his own voice, dismissing my love as manipulation, seeing the evidence of his active participation in Sarah's campaign, he crumbled completely under the weight of his betrayal. "Oh, God," he whispered, his face buried in his hands as his shoulders shook with silent sobs. "What have I done? What have we done to you, Mom? You saved Tommy's life, and we turned that love into a weapon against you." Brenda's attempt to flee the courtroom when she realized the scope of the evidence against her was captured by court security. Her collapse into desperate tears and complete disgrace revealed her role as the primary enabler of Sarah's psychological warfare, someone who had knowingly participated in the destruction of a grandmother's relationship with her grandchild. Davies, their lawyer, sat in stunned silence as the evidence mounted against him, knowing that his career and freedom were forfeit. The sophisticated legal manipulation he had orchestrated was being exposed as a conspiracy to commit elder abuse through the legal system itself. As the day's testimony concluded and the court recessed, I sat surrounded by my legal team, feeling something I hadn't experienced in nearly 3 years, the profound relief that comes from having the truth finally heard and believed. The evidence was overwhelming. Sarah's guilt was undeniable, and my vindication was complete. But even in that moment of triumph, I couldn't forget the cost of this victory. My family was shattered. My relationship with Tommy had been stolen during his most formative years, and my grandchildren would grow up knowing that their parents had systematically tried to destroy their grandmother's love for them. The truth had finally prevailed, but the price of that truth would echo through our family for generations to come. The verdict came after 5 days of deliberation delivered by Judge Margaret Foster with the gravity and moral authority that such a comprehensive case of family manipulation demanded. The courtroom was packed with spectators, media representatives, and advocates for elder rights and grandparent access who had been following the trial as a landmark case in family law. The evidence presented in this case, Judge Foster declared, her voice ringing with indignation, reveals a pattern of elder abuse and child psychological manipulation so systematic, so calculated, and so cruel that it represents one of the most disturbing examples of family betrayal this court has ever encountered. The defendants orchestrated a sophisticated campaign designed not only to sever the natural bond between grandmother and grandchild, but to weaponize that child's own family members against the woman who loved them most. Sarah was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for elder abuse, emotional child abuse, parental alienation, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Her sentence was enhanced due to the sophisticated nature of her psychological manipulation and the extensive use of legal and medical systems to harm her victim. Michael received 6 years for his active complicity in the campaign, his sentence reflecting both his participation and his ultimate cooperation with the investigation. The financial restitution was comprehensive and decisive. Sarah and Michael were ordered to pay for all my legal fees, medical expenses, from the stress-induced heart attack, the costs of my homelessness and emotional trauma, and punitive damages totaling over $2 million. The court also ordered the immediate dissolution of the Child Wellness Center that had been built with misappropriated funds, with those resources redirected to organizations supporting grandparent rights. But beyond the financial restoration, the court issued something even more precious to me: complete vindication of my character and professional integrity. Judge Foster's written opinion was a scathing condemnation of Sarah's actions and a comprehensive restoration of my reputation. Eleanor Matthews, the judge wrote, represents the finest qualities of professional child care and maternal devotion. She devoted her career to protecting and nurturing children, and she made extraordinary personal sacrifices to ensure her grandchild's survival and well-being. The abuse she suffered represents not just a crime against an individual, but an attack on the fundamental bonds that hold families together and the respect owed to those who dedicate their lives to caring for others. The legal vindication felt like a spiritual cleansing. After 3 years of being portrayed as a mentally unstable, dangerous woman whose love was actually manipulation, the legal system had formally recognized not only my innocence, but my exemplary character and the extraordinary sacrifices I had made for my family. Dr. Evans lost his medical license and faced criminal charges for his participation in Sarah's medical fraud. Davies was permanently disbarred and sentenced to 5 years for his role in manipulating the legal system to commit elder abuse. Brenda received 3 years for her conspiracy and participation in the campaign against me. From prison, Sarah sent me a letter that revealed the true depths of her psychological and moral collapse. Her handwriting was erratic, her thoughts scattered and desperate. Eleanor, she wrote, I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, but I'm begging for your forgiveness. I was so jealous of your relationship with Tommy, so threatened by your experience and wisdom. I convinced myself that you were trying to steal him from me, but I see now that I was the one who stole him from you. The letter continued for several pages, detailing her growing understanding of the magnitude of what she had destroyed and her complete isolation from any source of love or support. I destroyed the woman who saved my child's life, because I was too insecure to share his love with anyone else. I turned my husband against his own mother and corrupted my children's understanding of family. I see now what I really am, and I don't know how to live with it. Reading her letter, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction in seeing justice served, but also genuine sadness for the broken woman Sarah had revealed herself to be. I had never wanted to destroy her. I had simply wanted to love my grandson without interference. Michael's journey toward redemption was more hopeful, but equally complex. From his rehabilitation facility, he sent me a series of letters that showed genuine remorse and growing self-awareness about his role in the family's destruction. "Mom," he wrote in his first letter, "I spend every day trying to understand how I could have chosen Sarah's manipulation over your love, how I could have believed that the woman who raised me and saved my life multiple times was suddenly a threat to my family. I was a coward who chose the easy path of agreeing with Sarah rather than standing up for what I knew was right." He detailed his therapy sessions where he was working to understand the psychological techniques Sarah had used to turn him against me and his own children against their grandmother. The therapist says I was a victim of manipulation too, but that doesn't excuse my choices. I was an adult who should have protected you instead of participating in your destruction. Michael's letters became a regular part of my healing process, each one showing progress in his understanding of family dynamics and his commitment to eventual reconciliation. While full restoration of our relationship remained distant, I could see genuine change in his thinking and genuine remorse for the pain he had caused. Tommy's healing journey was perhaps the most delicate and important aspect of our family's reconstruction. Now 7 years old, he had spent his most formative years believing that his grandmother was someone to be feared and avoided. The revelation of how he had been manipulated was traumatic, but it also opened the door to authentic relationship building. "Grandma Eleanor," he said, during one of our first supervised visits, after the trial, "Daddy said you were the one who helped me when I was a sick baby. Is that why you love me so much?" His innocent questions broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. Through patient conversation and play therapy, Tommy began to understand that the grandmother he had been taught to fear was actually the person who had ensured his survival and had never stopped loving him despite being kept away. "I'm sorry I said mean things about you," he whispered during one of our visits, his small arms wrapped around my neck. "I didn't understand that you were trying to help me." Ethan and Chloe, now 14 and 10, struggled more with the complex emotions of guilt, betrayal, and confusion about their parents' actions. They had been old enough to remember our close relationship before Sarah's campaign began, and their participation in my humiliation weighed heavily on their consciences. "Grandma," Ethan said during one of our family therapy sessions, "I know what we said about you was wrong, but they made it seem like we were protecting Tommy. I'm sorry we believed their lies." Through ongoing therapy and patient family work, all 3 of my grandchildren began to understand how they had been used as weapons in an adult conflict that they never should have been exposed to. Their healing would take time, but I could see the foundation of authentic, loving relationships being rebuilt based on truth rather than manipulation. The victory was complete, but it was also profoundly bittersweet. My integrity had been restored. My relationship with my grandchildren was being rebuilt, and justice had been served. But the cost had been enormous. Years of Tommy's childhood had been stolen. My relationship with Michael was severely damaged, and the family I had worked so hard to protect and nurture had been shattered by the very people I had trusted most. As I sat in my restored home that first evening, after the trial concluded, surrounded by legal documents that vindicated my character and family photographs that had been returned to me, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Tommy's birth. Profound peace mixed with deep sadness for all that had been lost in the pursuit of truth. The war was over and justice had prevailed, but the work of healing and rebuilding our family was just beginning. 2 years after the trial that restored my reputation and reunited me with my grandchildren, I find myself living a life I never could have imagined during those dark months of isolation and legal battles. My home completely renovated with the restitution money and filled once again with the sounds of family life has become not just my sanctuary, but a gathering place for a family rebuilt on foundations of truth and genuine love. The house radiates with a different kind of energy now, one that comes from relationships that have been tested by the worst kind of betrayal and emerged stronger through the commitment to healing and honesty. Tommy, now 9 years old, spends every weekend with me, and our bond has grown deeper than I ever dared hope during those years when I was forbidden to see him. Grandma Eleanor, he said to me recently as we worked together in the garden I had created in his honor, "I'm glad I know the truth now about how much you love me. It makes me feel safe in a way I never felt before." His words capture something profound about our relationship now. The love between us isn't just natural affection. It's been tested and proven through the worst circumstances, making it unbreakable in ways that ordinary grandparent relationships might never experience. Ethan and Chloe have become my frequent companions and confidants, seeking me out not just for family activities, but for guidance through their own healing process. They often talk about feeling grateful that the truth was revealed, even though it meant losing the parents they thought they knew. "You teach us that love doesn't mean agreeing with everything someone does," Chloe told me during one of our evening walks. "You still love Daddy, even though he hurt you, but you didn't let that stop you from fighting for what was right." Their understanding of complex family dynamics, learned through trauma, but guided by therapy and honest conversation, has given them wisdom beyond their years about relationships, manipulation, and the importance of standing up for truth, even when it's difficult. Michael's journey toward redemption continues from his rehabilitation facility, where he's working not just on understanding his own psychological manipulation, but on developing skills for healthy family relationships. His letters have evolved from expressions of guilt to thoughtful reflections on parenting family dynamics and his hopes for eventual reconciliation. "I want to be the father Tommy deserves," he wrote in his most recent letter, "and the son you raised me to be. I know that will take years of work and proof through actions, not just words. But I finally understand what family really means, and I want to build something authentic with all of you." While our relationship remains cautious and long distance, I can see genuine change in his thinking and genuine commitment to becoming someone worthy of his children's respect and love. The work is hard and the timeline uncertain, but there's hope where once there was only betrayal. Sarah remains in prison, serving her sentence in relative isolation. Her few letters to me have shown increasing mental instability and a desperate need for forgiveness that goes far beyond anything I could provide. The woman who orchestrated such sophisticated psychological warfare has been reduced to someone who can barely maintain coherent thought, destroyed by the magnitude of her own cruelty. I respond to her letters with compassion, but without false hope. Some actions create consequences that cannot be undone, relationships that cannot be restored. Sarah will have to find her redemption elsewhere, if she can find it at all. Brenda has faded into complete obscurity, her social standing destroyed, and her relationship with her daughter severed by their mutual betrayal. Her isolation serves as a reminder of how manipulation and cruelty ultimately destroy the manipulator as thoroughly as their victims. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation in my life has been my emergence as a national advocate for grandparent rights and elder abuse prevention. My story has become a powerful tool for educating families, legal professionals, and social workers about the sophisticated tactics that can be used to isolate elderly family members from their loved ones. I speak at conferences across the country, sharing my experience with audiences who are dealing with similar situations or working to prevent them. My memoir, The Grandmother Denied: A Fight for Love and Truth, has become a bestseller and resource guide for other families facing parental alienation and grandparent exclusion. Jennifer and I founded the Eleanor Matthews Foundation for Family Justice, which provides legal assistance and emotional support for grandparents who have been systematically excluded from their grandchildren's lives. We work with a network of attorneys, therapists, and advocates who specialize in these complex cases, offering hope to people who thought they had no recourse against sophisticated family manipulation. What happened to you represents a new frontier in elder abuse. I tell audiences during my speaking engagements, it's not just financial exploitation or physical neglect. It's the systematic destruction of family bonds through psychological manipulation and legal intimidation. But there is always hope, and there are always people willing to fight for justice if you have the courage to seek help. The work is demanding but deeply fulfilling. Every letter I receive from a grandparent who found the courage to fight for their relationship with their grandchildren, every successful case, our foundation helps support every family that reunites after being torn apart by manipulation, reminds me that my suffering was not meaningless. My days are full and purposeful in ways I never expected after such trauma. Mornings often find me in correspondence with other abuse survivors or consulting with attorneys on complex family cases. Afternoons might be spent in my garden with Tommy, teaching him about growing things and nurturing life, or helping Ethan and Chloe with school projects that often involve research about family dynamics and child psychology. Evenings belong to family time and reflection. Tommy, Ethan, Chloe, and I gather regularly for dinners that are filled with laughter, honest conversation, and the deep contentment that comes from relationships built on truth rather than convenience or fear. As I look back on the journey from my lowest point in that homeless shelter to this life of purpose and authentic connection, I am struck by the resilience of the human spirit and the power of truth to eventually prevail. The trauma I experienced will always be part of my story, but it no longer defines me. Instead, it has become the foundation for a deeper understanding of love, justice, and the importance of fighting for what is right, even when the cost seems unbearable. My grandchildren are growing up understanding that families can survive even the worst betrayals when people commit to honesty and healing. They're learning that love doesn't mean accepting abuse, that respect must be earned through actions, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's harmful behavior. These lessons learned through pain, but resulting in wisdom, will serve them well as they build their own families and face their own challenges. The legacy I'm leaving them isn't just the memory of a grandmother who fought for them, but the knowledge that truth and justice are worth fighting for no matter the cost. 4 years have passed since that devastating day when Sarah first denied me the right to hold my newborn grandson, And as I sit in my garden this evening, watching Tommy help his cousins build a fort while sharing stories about their day, I am overwhelmed by the profound transformation that suffering can create when it's met with unwavering commitment to truth and love. My home resonates with the sounds of genuine family connection, rebuilt on a foundation of honesty rather than manipulation or fear. The laughter that fills these rooms now carries a deeper meaning because it's been earned through struggle, forgiveness, and the hard work of authentic relationship building. Each gathering feels precious because we all understand how easily family bonds can be severed by those who would exploit love for their own purposes. The work I do now helping other grandparents and elderly family members who face systematic exclusion and abuse has given my later years a purpose I never anticipated. Through our foundation, we have assisted over 1,500 families in recognizing and combating sophisticated manipulation tactics, restored dozens of grandparent-grandchild relationships, and changed legislation in 12 states to better protect the rights of loving grandparents. My story has become a beacon of hope for those who thought justice was impossible, proof that even the most calculated and comprehensive betrayal can be overcome through courage, persistence, and the support of people who believe in the fundamental importance of family love. But more than professional vindication, I have discovered the profound peace that comes from living authentically, surrounded by people who love me for who I truly am, rather than what I can provide them. The lesson I carry from this journey reaches deeper than simple strategies for protecting oneself from family manipulation. I learned that our greatest strength lies not in avoiding conflict or maintaining false peace, but in having the courage to confront deception and fight for truth when those we love are threatened. Self-worth is indeed an unshakable foundation that no one can take from us without our permission, and authentic family relationships are built on mutual respect and genuine care rather than control or manipulation. I carry no bitterness towards Sarah or the pain she caused. Bitterness would only poison the peace I have fought so hard to achieve and the relationships I have worked so carefully to rebuild. Instead, I have transformed my deepest trauma into lasting purpose, becoming an advocate for justice and dignity for those who cannot fight for themselves. To anyone listening who may be facing their own family betrayal, who feels isolated and manipulated by those who should cherish them, I want you to know this. Your love matters. Your voice has value. And there are people who will stand with you when you find the courage to seek truth and justice. The path may be long and the cost may be high, but it leads to something infinitely precious. A life lived with integrity, authentic relationships built on honesty, and the profound peace that comes from knowing you never compromised your values, even in your darkest hour. That kind of peace earned through struggle and sacrifice becomes a legacy worth leaving for those who come after us.